All right, everyone. Well, it is 11 o'clock. I will go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm Dr. Molly Hubert. I'll introduce myself here a bit more in a minute. But I am going to talk about fire today. If you've ever been in one of my classes, I talk about wildfire pretty frequently. I'm going to put some context into why I talk about it so frequently. So we're going to talk a bit about fire and then the impact that it has on Appalachian biodiversity. So I do recognize some faces in here. There are some that I don't recognize. So if you don't know me, like I mentioned, my name is Dr. Molly Hubert. I'm the chair of the Natural Sciences Department, and I'm also an assistant professor of biology in our Natural Sciences Department, so in Fisher Hall. I got my PhD from UTK in ecology and evolutionary biology, and while I was there, and still currently, I focused on disturbance ecology. And what that means is that I wanted to understand when humans came into a system, how they messed things up, and then what happened afterwards. So specifically on the plant side. But beyond that, I looked at fire ecology, trying to understand plant community ecology and how plants kind of function, and a little bit of conservation biology too. But while I was in graduate school, my main research project was trying to understand how plants recovered from the 2016 Gatlinburg wildfires. Does anybody remember those fires that happened almost a decade ago? Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So while I was in graduate school, I spent my time trying to understand what those impacts were. And this is actually a picture that I took from pretty directly after the fire. So before we get kind of into the topic for the day, I want to gauge you guys. I want to understand, when you think of wildfires, what do you think of? What words come to mind? So there's a QR code up here. If you're interested, you can go ahead and scan it and just type in one or two words on what you think wildfire means. We'll take a minute. Okay. So as these are coming in, I think you can see kind of the big red theme here is destruction, right? And I mean, that is part of it, and I am going to talk about some of that today, but I'm also going to talk about some of the positive things about wildfire too. So yeah, a lot of destruction, killing, crime, for sure, sometimes devastation, absolutely. All right, thank you, I appreciate that. So keep that in your mind. I want you to keep your preconceived notions of wildfire in your mind right now, and we'll see where those end up at the end of the lecture. Okay, so just a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to start thinking about Appalachian biodiversity first. I'll talk a bit about why it's unique, and then we'll move into the fire component of things. So I'm going to talk a bit about the ecology of fire, a bit about the impacts. We'll get into types of wildfire. I have a live demonstration for you guys. And then we'll talk a bit and wrap it up about management of fire and where we go from here. Okay, so first things first, let's define something just for a minute here. I'm talking about biodiversity today. And if you don't know what biodiversity is, really it's just the diversity of life. And all around the globe, there are biodiversity hotspots that we call them. And basically, they're just places of diversity that are really, really high and really important for conservation. Okay, so if we look at this map right here, this is a map of the entire world. And of course, you can see in these different colors, there's areas that are really high in biodiversity. So in green, we have temperate forests. In orange, we have tropical rainforests. But what you may not notice is that we, in Appalachia, are in a biodiversity hotspot. We have a lot of diversity in the area that we live in. So even comparable to tropical rainforests, East Tennessee has a lot of diversity. Okay. So when we talk about the Appalachian Mountains, the Appalachian Mountain Range, if you don't know, extends from about Alabama or so all the way up north, and it's kind of divided into different sub-regions. So if we go way up north, kind of in that green, those are the northern Appalachian Mountains. Us, we're in kind of the south central area of the Appalachian Mountains. But just to put context on where we're talking about today, it's going to be this entire mountain range. Okay? So there's a lot of different areas that have different types of diversity in these different sub-regions. Okay? So specifically, in Appalachia, the southern Appalachian Mountains, there's going to be, like I mentioned, a lot of biodiversity, and in fact, it is one of the most biologically diverse areas in the world. Okay, so Great Smoky Mountains National Park specifically has over 10,000 native species. There's more that have been undiscovered so far, and there's more that are discovered each year. And everything from fungi to salamanders to plants have been discovered over the years, and there's more to come. So we have a lot of diversity here, and because we have high diversity, that's worth maintaining. right? We want to maintain our spot as a hot spot, right? So specifically, what makes Appalachian biodiversity unique? And really, what it boils down to is that we have a variety of ecosystems that exist throughout that mountain range. So just to name a few here, and I have these pictures, one of the primary ones is called deciduous broadleaf forest. So this is something that people travel here every year to see. It's the fall leaves changing colors. It's those trees that are really beautiful, those maples and oaks. Those are our deciduous broadleaf forests. We also have what's called mixed mesophytic forests. These tend to be a bit higher in elevation, very rich in diversity, but kind of your traditional looking forest area. Okay. We also have spruce fir forests. Let's see if my pointer works. Maybe not. Nope. So spruce fir forests tend to be also in high elevation, tend to have more evergreen type trees, and are home to more rare species that can withstand higher elevations. Okay. We also have cove forests right down here, often where species like rhododendron may exist. They also exist in high elevations. Really luscious plant growth, a lot of kind of underbrush and things that grow low to the forest floor. And then finally, bogs and wetlands. Okay, so bogs and wetlands are more isolated, tend to support amphibians, things like salamanders, and a lot of rare plants. So because we have all of these different types of environments that exist in the Appalachian Mountains, we are able to support different types of species. So that's part of why there's so much biodiversity in these areas. Okay. Now, however, this area in the Appalachian Mountains, the biodiversity is under stress. Okay, so ecosystems that are present in this area are often under stress from human pressures, from us just doing our daily activities with the expansion of human populations and building buildings and roads and trying to live our life day to day. We put pressure on these ecosystems. And that means that there's going to be things that these organisms need to adapt to, right? So why this can become a problem is that some organisms can be really sensitive to those changes, right? So we have this high area of biodiversity. If we're changing it, those organisms are not used to it, and that means that it can have detrimental consequences sometimes, right? Some species that exist in the Appalachian Mountain Range are endemic here, meaning that this is where they are native, but also that they may not be found anywhere else in the world. So if that is true, there's a lot of species that are going to have small ranges, so there's not many places for them to move. They're going to have narrow habitat needs, meaning that they have a specific set of habitat requirements in the area that they live. So if we kind of come in and destroy some things, that's going to mess with how they survive, right? So all of this being said, there are disturbances, like us doing our normal activities, but also things that we may cause, like fire, that can create habitat change and ultimately change the amount of diversity within our mountain range. Right? So in Appalachia, wildfire specifically has been around for a very, very long time. Prior to European arrival in the area, indigenous peoples used fire to shape the landscape to their needs. So they would burn down some forested area for agricultural crops. They would use it and put those ashes from that fire back into the soil to give it nutrients to grow their next set of crops. But once Europeans moved in, we used fire in a different way. We used it to kind of cut down the entire forest, to use it for logging. So its purpose has shifted throughout the years. Okay? But regardless, fire in this area has been around for tens of thousands of years and has ultimately shaped how the landscape is. Now, more recently, anthropogenic, which is just human-caused fire, has been more regular than lightning fires. So what it used to be prior to European settlement, lightning fires were more prevalent, and anthropogenic fires, human-caused fires, weren't as prevalent. So as time has kind of moved forward and we're in the face of climate change and everything kind of changing around us, fires that are caused by humans are becoming a lot more common. And not just small fires, but also large and very intense fires. So historically, once our kind of Eastern European ancestors moved in, fire's been pretty suppressed. So as you can imagine, as more people move into an area, you need to make sure it's safe. So one of the ways to make it safe is to make sure that fires don't happen. So historically, people have tried to keep fire out of the area just to keep people safe. Now, that isn't always the best practice, of course, and I'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But historically, suppression has been the #1 way to make sure that wildfires, large wildfires, stay out of our area. Okay. So as a disturbance, it's pretty common. Now, disturbance in this context, like I mentioned early on, is just human caused. So when we come in and tend to mess things up, unfortunately, what happens to the environment afterwards? So it's common in this area. It is helpful for maintaining plant community composition and helping to maintain that diversity, but it has to be in a certain capacity. So we can't have really, really large wildfires that come in and rip through the entire community and the ecosystem and then expect there to be a lot of diversity afterwards. It has to be kind of maintained at a lower level and utilized wisely, right? So if fire does come in, it can end up determining the progression of an entire ecosystem, right? So as you can imagine, there's been large wildfires in California, right? Those large wildfires in California ultimately shape that landscape to be more fire resistant through time. And if we are to see something like that happen here in the future, we could expect that plants and animals and organisms down the line, way down the line, would be more fire resistant as well. One thing that can be problematic is that when we do have fires in this area, since it's not kind of part of a regular occurrence right now, that can mean that areas might be susceptible to invasive species. Now, invasive species are just species that are non-native in this area, but then compete heavily with native species. And that can be really problematic, as I'm sure you can imagine, that if our native species are trying to survive ongoing disturbances and thrive and reproduce and do all that fun stuff, and they also have to compete with native species, that's going to put a lot, or invasive species rather, that's going to put a lot of pressure on that organism, right? So that can be really problematic. So, what this looks like, humans have expanded the wildfire risk all across the United States, all across the world, really. But why this is a problem is that we're creating what's called wildland-urban interfaces. And wildland-urban interfaces is pretty much what it sounds like, is that we have these natural, beautiful areas, forested areas, that are coming right up against areas that humans build. And that's a problem, right? It's a problem for 2 reasons. One, humans like to light things on fire, unfortunately. And if we like to light things on fire, that may translate to the natural environment that's around it. And 2, if there is a fire, it can be problematic to put out, right? So you have to account for people around there and being able to make sure that they're safe and cared for, right? Excuse me. So there was a study done a while back that looked at kind of this expansion of the wildland-urban interface across the United States. And there's a lot of information here, but I want to point out one thing. And that's this little square that's right here, number 2, okay? And that number 2 is right in East Tennessee, right where we are. We have one of the highest expanding wildland-urban interfaces in the United States, meaning that we are continuously creating this area to build up where we live that's right next to beautiful vegetation, and that's problematic for fires. Prime example is Gatlinburg, okay? So just to point this out too, this expansion has been happening for a while, but human-caused fires account for 84% of the fires that occur in the United States. We are the #1 cause of wildfires in the United States, which is kind of scary, right? But keep this in mind, we are in an area that is really close to natural vegetation, and that can be a problem for future fires, okay? So as I mentioned, a relatively recent example, of course, was the Chimney Tops 2 fires that happened in 2016. Now, the Chimney Tops 2 fire was relatively large for our area. It was about 11,000 acres, which compared to Western wildfires is pretty small, but we don't see fires like that in this area. We see tiny fires that we can manage and put out, but this was a large fire that ended up spreading throughout Gatlinburg for about a month or so. Excuse me. So this was a man-made fire. that ended up being really problematic. And it was very eye-opening to see this happen because it wasn't something that's been characteristic of our region, right? We see this happen in California, we see it happen in the West Coast quite frequently. We don't normally see it happen in the East Coast, okay? More recent example, excuse me, in Tellico Plains, which is where I live, in March of this year, there was a 200-acre fire that happened there. Relatively small comparatively, but still another fire that was human-caused that did damage excuse me, to vegetation and ultimately is going to have likely an impact on diversity for a couple years. It's really interesting. Now, just to put this in a bit larger perspective, there are some really great maps out there that show ongoing and active wildfires happening throughout the United States. So if you don't mind for a second, go ahead and scan this QR code. And it's going to show you active wildfires that are currently happening in the United States. Once everybody gets this scanned, I'm going to pull it up as well. If you have it pulled up, what you should see if you're scrolling around is that there are a couple active wildfires in the Appalachian Mountain Range, right? There's the Blue Ridge Fire. It's like 88% contained or something right now, but it's active, it's ongoing, and we're seeing this happen way more frequently. Okay? We've always seen fires in this area, but we're starting to see larger, more frequent fires that could potentially reshape how we think about biodiversity in this area. Okay?
It looks like the bulk of them are in Mexico.
Yeah, and that's true too. So some are south and some are in the west, but those areas are more adapted to wildfires. This area, unfortunately, is not, and that can be a problem, right? So, a couple things to think about as we're thinking about wildfires. There are 3 characteristics to building your perfect wildfire, okay? Now those 3 characteristics, oxygen, heat, and fuel. Okay, so oxygen, of course, you need something to be able to sustain combustion. Okay, some type of air supply. Okay. Now, often what can happen is that air supply can be increased by windy conditions, right? And that can also be problematic for several different reasons. You need heat, and that heat source is going to end up igniting fuels. So common sources of heat, us, unfortunately, and lightning, right? And then finally, that third component is fuel. So you need something, if you have oxygen and if you have heat, to be able to sustain that fire, okay? Now, in Appalachia, which I'll talk about here more in a minute, we have a lot of fuel. And this is where it becomes problematic when we have that expansion of the wildland-urban interface, is because we have people that are building right next to that natural vegetation. And that natural vegetation, due to different climate processes and ongoing of climate change issues, that fuel is drying out. And when humans light things on fire, that can be problematic for the vegetation in this area that is not used to having recurrent fires like that. Okay, so keep that in mind too. Excuse me. So, in general, there are 3 types of wildfire. There are crown fires. So in crown fires, which is our top picture up there, it's going to burn up the entire length of the tree. These are the most intense and most dangerous wildfires. Okay, so we get kind of full capacity, full intensity burn with a crown fire. Surface fires, only burn kind of the leaf litter on the ground. These fires are really easy to put out, they're easily managed relatively, and they cause the least damage to a forest. Okay? So surface fires, when we do things like prescribed burning, which I'll talk about in a bit later, surface fires are what we want. We want to clear out some of that leaf litter on the ground so that we don't end up having something like a crown fire that can cause a lot of damage and be a really high intensity impact. Right? And then finally, we have ground fires. Ground fires can be problematic. This is this picture down here. They are underground sometimes, or called subsurface fires. They're deep, kind of in the accumulation of soil and peat, and can be really difficult to put out. Okay? So they move relatively slowly, which is a good thing, but they have a hard time getting suppressed. Okay? So we, as humans, in trying to manage these ecosystems, don't have a lot of good luck putting them out. Okay? So, with that being said, the reason I'm guessing you're here, I'm going to light some stuff on fire. So how do wildfires spread in general? So in Appalachia, just to keep it very general, we have 3 different types of forest. The first is, let's say, sparse forest with some light underbrush, okay? So in our sparse forest with light underbrush, we are going to see some fire occurrences, but we'll see what happens with that here in a second. The second is dense forest. So the trees are very compact together, not a whole lot of light hitting the surface, so there's not a whole lot of underbrush, but the trees are very compact. And then finally, we have dense forest with heavy underbrush. This is what a lot of the Appalachian Mountain Range has now. We have a lot of trees with a lot of underbrush that has not been maintained, so when it dries out, it can become a problem, right? So let's see what this looks like in real time. Okay, so let me make sure I got my order right here. I'm gonna add a little fuel for this one. So in our first example here, this is our sparse forest with light underbrush. So what I'm doing, this is called a matchstick forest. I have matchsticks in clay up here, and these matchsticks are representing our trees. Okay, so in this first forest here, we have kind of a relatively even amount of spread of our trees and some light underbrush. And I'm using some Timothy hay for our underbrush. Okay. So, and I have all safety measures up here, my fire extinguisher and my watering can, so all of my bosses in the room, just pointing that out. Okay, so let's say we have a lightning fire. If a lightning fire strikes, it's going to hit on the top of a tree or on the side of a tree, right? So if I light my lightning fire, not super problematic in a sparse forest, right? Okay. Now, in our underbrush, if it's a human-caused fire, which is going to be on the underbrush, still not overly problematic, right? Sparse forest, not a lot of issues, maybe a couple hot spots. Okay. But still not problematic, other than that one tree, sorry. Okay. Okay. Now we have a dense forest, okay? Still relatively light underbrush, but the trees are compact together, okay? So trees are more tightly compact, light underbrush. Let's see if this is a problem. Okay, so lightning strikes. Here's our fire. I'm going to push it along a little bit. So with a dense forest, when our trees are close together, that fire, especially if it's a crown fire, is going to spread tree to tree, right? Now, if this is in combination with human-caused fires, which start in the underbrush, maybe. That's going to be problematic, right? If it spreads. Okay. So dense forest, light underbrush, more problematic for crown fires. Okay. Now, the real problem. Are you all ready? Okay. Everybody squirmed in their seat for this one. You shouldn't be excited about this. This is bad. Okay. So, our real problem in Appalachia is we have dense forest but also heavy underbrush. So we have trees that are tightly compact to one another, but we also have heavy underbrush that is likely to dry out and is also likely to spread up the trunks of trees. So let's say we have a human-caused fire in Appalachia like we did in Gatlinburg. Likely what is happening is that our underbrush is going to light on fire. And then spread to our dense forest, right? We're going to light a couple fires. Okay. So as this fire burns, it's going to spread to our other treetops. It's going to spread to the underbrush. I'm helping it along a little bit. Okay. So the fire is going to spread treetop to treetop and then underbrush too. So moral of this story here, as I let this burn for a second, is that we need to clear out that underbrush, right? So if we have a dense forest like we do in Appalachia, that underbrush needs to be cleared out to prevent something like this from happening in real life. And we did see this happen in 2016 with our Gatlinburg fires, right? Sorry, I'll put the fire out. Okay. So this is something that has occurred for hundreds of years, ever since the indigenous people, ever since we had Eastern European people move into this area and start doing these really large fires and then totally suppressed it, we now get these fires that burn really hot, really intense, start in the underbrush and then move up through the ground. Okay. So, with this demonstration and everything I've been talking about so far, I'm making fire seem bad. And in a sense it is. It is bad in a sense, from a high intensity, high frequency standpoint. Can fire be beneficial? Absolutely. It is absolutely 100% beneficial. But it has to be done in the right way. What we need, especially in Appalachia, is low intensity fires. So low intensity fires, bouncing back for a second, are going to be like our surface fires, right? Burning out that underbrush. So getting rid of a lot of this brush in here so we don't have that complication of burning that dense forest that we have, right? That becomes problematic if we have people that we're trying to take care of and make sure that they're safe, right? And then also it benefits our plants and our animals. So these low intensity fires, which is often done via prescribed burning. Prescribed burning is just when officials go out and they say, okay, we have this area that we can burn, let's mark it off, and we're going to monitor it for X amount of time, and then make sure that it gets put out at the end. So when that happens, and we do these low intensity fires, it increases soil nutrients, it ends up reducing competition, so plants and animals that are in a similar area get reduced, which sounds bad, but it helps the environment. We clear out that leaf litter and that debris. And then also, if we have these low intensity fires and they're relatively frequent, it stops the large fires from happening. It's a preventative measure, right? So in Appalachia, there are prescribed fires that happen. They are scheduled, they are regulated, and the federal workers do a really great job of doing that. However, it becomes really hard to be able to maintain that schedule and to be able to do it at a timely manner, because the conditions have to be absolutely perfect for prescribed burns to happen. It can't be too windy, it can't be too cold, it can't be raining, right? They all have to be able to control those factors that go into that. So it gets a little difficult to do that. Okay, so how do we end up managing wildfires to maintain biodiversity? Like I mentioned, prescribed fire is the #1 way. So we can do prescribed fire and encourage native species to come back. It ends up reducing some invasive species if that's a problem in that area. Small fires kind of mimic the natural fire regime that has happened in this area. So when indigenous peoples were in this area and they were burning the land for agriculture, it kind of mimics that. So it's a good thing for our soils and for our plants and animals. If we don't do these things, what we can see are these uncontrolled wildfires, which can obviously be pretty ecologically destructive. That was kind of one of the results of the Gatlinburg wildfire, right? It was ecologically destructive in some ways, but caused a lot of problems. And then finally, if we have strategic fire management plans, it can balance kind of the ecological health and the risk factors of the area. So we know that the wildland-urban interface is an issue we have to deal with, right? There's a lot of people. We have to be safe if we're going to be burning these things. So we want to make sure that the way that we do this is keeping people in mind, but also ecological health. Okay. Oops. So with that being said, a couple key takeaways. Fire has a dual role, right? So it can be a threat, for sure, but it's also an ecological necessity. In small amounts, at low intensities, it's great for the environment. At large intensities and large scales, it can be problematic, right? So we have to maintain our environment via prescribed burning to help keep it an ecological necessity, especially in this area. Biodiversity and its resilience depends on proper fire management. So keeping a community resilient, being able to survive different types of disturbances and survive us coming in and building and doing our thing, needs to rely on some type of prescribed burning and that management, okay? So ultimately, fire suppression isn't the answer. We've suppressed fire for a really, really long time, especially in this area, and that's not what we need to do. We need to use it, but use it wisely. so I have one more question I'm going to ask you. It was a relatively brief lecture, brief overview of biodiversity and fire in Appalachia, but I'm curious and want to get a better understanding, since we thought fire was destructive initially. What do we think now about wildfire? Have we gained a better understanding? Excellent. I'll take it. That's great. Awesome. Good deal. Hopefully down the line, I will make a class out of this, but for now, we'll settle for a convocation. So a couple things. What can you do? If you're the type of person that are like, okay, you know, I see the issue here, I see the problem, what can I do to help this? Easily enough, support fire management programs. There's fire management programs in every county, so make sure that you're informed about what those programs are and how you can help. Connect science to decision making, so ultimately, as a voter, vote for candidates that take these things seriously and want to help. If there's any option to get involved in local conservation or monitoring efforts, absolutely do it. There's a lot of volunteer work that can happen in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park to help monitor these things and keep track and keep biodiversity thriving. So if you're able to, take part. And then finally, you can also just educate your friends and family. Talk about what you learned here today. Talk about that small fires are a good thing to prevent big fires, right? And with that being said, that is all I have, but I'm happy to take any questions if you have any questions. Thank you, guys.